a CV kind of answers. It answers the question, what am I? Am I an academic? Am I an artist? Am I a writer? Am I a worker? Am I a colleague? Am I reliable and steady? Well, your CV should answer all of these questions and much, much more. The CV actually represents you to readers, and this is something that people think about. People tend to think about listing things, but they don't tend to think about what the document is for a reader. And this is very important. So, you know, when somebody takes a CV, like I might in a hiring committee, for example, I look at the academic aspects, what degrees you have, what research you've done. I look at it aesthetically. In essence, you as an artist, how did you present this visually? Is it all clumped together and crowded, or, you know, what does it look like? I look at you as a writer. Again, how does this CV look in written form? What does it tell me about how you organize information? I look at it and I find out about you as a worker, what kinds of work you've done, whether you've been consistent in what you've done, how broad the kinds of work you've done are. And then I look at it in terms of you as a colleague. Have you collaborated? Have you done service? Who have you worked with? And then, are you reliable? Have you done things routinely? I look at all these questions. There are 4 basic components to the CV. And these form the major headings of the CV. And these headings typically will each be on their own page. So there's personal, publications and professional contribution, teaching, and service, okay? And if you look at the example CV, you'll see the first page there has personal on it. And then you'll notice that when you turn to page 2, it ends and there's a bunch of white space, and then page 3 has publications and professional contributions. These are discrete sections of the CV, and they each start their own page, unless you have a very tiny CV, in which case you'd put a couple on the same page. So under personal, you're going to put things like contact information, citizenship information, employment history and awards. Under publications and professional contributions, it is, as it says, anything you've published. Under teachings, you're going to list courses taught, and if you're a beginner, you'll also list your assistantships. And as you get experienced, you're going to be listing the students you've supervised and in what capacity. And it'll also list your service, and if you're a beginner, you're going to be listing your work on graduate student committees and committees of the faculty and the program. And there's also committee work, or community work, excuse me. And community work is work that's relevant to your professional career. Now, usually, as I said, each component starts a new page. It's centered, typed, and in uppercase. And one of the things you want to do on the first page, in the upper right-hand corner of your CV, put the date, so that people know this is the date that is represented. The material that's here is represented up to this date. Page numbering of the first page is bottom center, and the remaining pages should have your name as a running head with the page number below it. So why would you do that? Because if I have an application file, and I have that file, and I see that, for example, I'm reading 10 files, 15 files. I've taken a binder of material out of the office, and I drop the CV. I want to make sure I get the right material back to the right CV. And it's just a little bit nutty, but it has happened where bits of CV have gotten tangled up, and you're trying to sort out which CV comes from which person. Now, there are visual aesthetics to the CV. As I said, 12-point font until you get a bit further along in your career. When you get mid-career or later career, sometimes you want to keep your CV down to about 20, 25 pages. So, because once it gets beyond that, it's very cumbersome. So you might go to 11 point or something like that, or you might put your committee work, or you make some decisions, right, about how much you put in and where it goes. But the one thing you shouldn't do is make it very decorative. This is not the time to play with fancy fonts, and you use bold for most headings. Under every section of the CV, the order is always from the most recent to the oldest, okay? And for some sections, the dates are separated from the rest of the text. In the sample CV that you have there, if you look at the first page of it, you can see a chronological order from most recent to oldest, and you can see very clearly what this person was up to when. And that's the idea behind it. You want to make the CV a pleasure for the reader to read. And that's the goal. And the CV has to tell at a glance what a reader needs to know. If I look at the first page of this example CV, name is right there. I'm an academic. Citizenship, Canadian, right? The address is there. It's all laid out. It's clear. There's enough white space there that you can get the information quickly. So there you are. There's the sample with the name, and you put your first name and last name. If you reverse it, make sure you put a comma. Some names, depending upon the person, sometimes people have what seems like two first names, right? So it could be George Henry. Now, is it Henry George or George Henry? So you've got to help your reader know about the order of your names, and everything you do is oriented towards ease for the reader. Now you might say, as I said, always dated. Citizenship, you might say, why should I put citizenship on? In the hiring in Canada, there's preference given to Canadian citizens. And if there's any doubt, and I know this sounds an awful thing to say, but if you have a name that people will wonder, is this person a citizen? Then you need to announce that you're a citizen instead of having people wonder. And you don't have to do much else than just say Canadian citizen. You put your address, you use your home address. That's the address you would normally be communicating from and would expect to receive communication at. You wouldn't put your university address. Part of the reason is you could move midway. You want a stable address. And then you get to the degrees and academic professional qualifications section. You'll notice here that you have to put the start and end date of your degree in. So you started in September of 2007, and let's suppose you defend your dissertation in August. Well, the time of study is what's represented in this left-hand column, and then the date the degree is awarded is actually written inside the descriptive information. So, for example, if you are a PhD student right now and you're not finished your degree, there's also something else you need to do, which is let people know how far along you are. Same way with an MEd, quite frankly. So what you do is put PhD in education, emphasis in whatever it is you're studying, if it's literacy, higher education, tell people. And then say, coursework completed, dissertation in progress, right? So people know right away. Nobody has to send an email asking. You've taken account of the questions your reader wants to know in advance. You put your university, you put your dissertation topic, right? Now, as you go on, you'll see the MEd with the specialization in, and that was awarded in November 2002, even though you finished the work in August. And that, people will have questions about dates and boundaries, and what you're trying to do is answer all those questions. I studied over this period of time, and at my university, degrees are awarded in November. However, if you put the period from June or July 2000 to November 2002, it would look like you'd studied over that period. And so you're trying to give people an indication of your study habits, believe it or not, and how long it's taking you to complete the degree by these features. Um, and we've talked about the fact that you want to say the degree was awarded at a certain date. If you have a specialization, like a major, if it's an undergraduate degree, or in master's or doctoral degrees, sometimes there's a specialization, but it isn't, you don't get a little piece of paper saying it is. You do need to know, you do need to let your reader know what the area of concentration was. And the one thing you see is this is a pretty easy format to read. And people will expect, or people will see what's there, they can read it fairly clearly, they can kind of track your progress in your studies. Now, yes?
Sorry, can I just ask with the bachelor, for instance, would you indicate honors or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's honors, indicate honors. You should indicate whatever it is that's unique about that degree. So if it's a BA and it's honors, put honors, and if it's a specialization, put the major. Sometimes people do major minor, but you know, you can get kind of carried away. And you don't want these lines to be overly long, but you do want them to represent you. You're not going to get a position based on your undergraduate degree, but it does show the breadth that you bring to your current discipline, whatever it is that you're studying. So you want to highlight all these aspects. Now, when you're trying to describe your employment, you need to provide enough information so that somebody who's unfamiliar with the locale where you worked could understand it. So, for example, it's not enough to say York University. You have to say York University, Toronto, because people will get it confused with there's a York over in England. And I think it's the University of York. But nevertheless, you need to be clear enough. If you work for an association that's related to education, like an ABC Literacy, you need to say where that was located. Now, Toronto is a large enough city that you don't need to say anything else. Everyone in the world, you know, kind of has an idea of where Toronto is. However, if you were working in a smaller city, you'd need to give the province, or you need to give some more information. Now, one of the questions people will say was, shouldn't I put the course I was teaching here? No. You're going to list the kinds of things you taught at academic institutions under the section on teaching, okay? And again, it's easy to see. The positions are in italics, what position you held, and the location and other information is not in italics. And you have to list here relevant experience. So if you spent the summer, you know, working in the library as a clerk, and you're applying for an academic position, you leave off your clerk stuff. Or, you know, a waitress at a fast food restaurant or whatever. You're trying to make relevant experience. Now, readers will look at the chronology, and they will figure out how your employment dates and your education dates match. And sometimes they overlap. Sometimes people are taking their degrees while working part-time. And that's why it's so important to have those dates easily accessible on the left-hand side. In terms of awards, if you win an award, if you want to put the monetary value, you can. Sometimes some awards have prestige and they don't have money, you know? So there's open questions about where you go with that. But certainly you should list the awards you've received, the institution or society or, you know, benefactor who provided that award, and the relevant date. In terms of your publications and professional contributions, one of the things you notice is that right now this looks like a very kind of complicated page, and part of the reason for that is because I'm trying to give you an idea, if you look to the right hand, of potential headings that you might use later on in your career. And if you look at what's there on the left hand, it's kind of more likely the kind of headings you might have as a beginner. And you'll see this section is called Publications and Professional Contributions. Our first section is on publications. So you look there and there's a lifetime summary, and that lifetime summary basically takes the subheadings that are down below and just provides a count. How many items of each type are there? If you don't have an item, like an article in an edited book, you don't put it down and put 0. You only list what's there, okay? So, one of the things that happens, and I've served on a lot of hiring committees and a lot of tenure file preparation cases and different file reading activities where I've had to look at someone's CV. And it is inevitable that the numbers will be counted. And if you are being kind to your reader, you will count them for them. And so that's what this little lifetime summary is all about. It's doing the work. So even though you've got 1111, that's okay. Now, the first kind of section is articles in edited books. That's if you have a chapter in a book that somebody else has written. You might write some curriculum materials. If you do write something that's what's called non-refereed, it might have been solicited. You can put in parentheses at the end if something is solicited. So let's suppose that the Teacher Federation knows you're an expert in this field, and or you're an emerging expert, and they want you to write a little article for their teacher magazine. You can put at the end in parentheses solicited. The key thing here is that in order to get into some of the higher levels, like articles in edited books or curriculum materials, the item has to be published. So if you sat and you developed a curriculum in your school and it never got published, like the school board didn't publish many copies of it, print copies and so on, it appears as, it actually, there's nowhere for it to go. The key thing is on a CV, somebody needs to be able to get their hands on a copy. If they can't get their hands on a copy, if we can't go to the Windermere School District and say, I'm an academic, helped to write something about improving classroom literacy back in 2005. Do you have a copy of that around? And if they can't lay their hands on it, somebody will know, oh yeah, we've got that in a file. We can't give it to you, it's our only copy, but yes, it was circulated to every teacher, or these days it will be put on the internet, and that is a whole other category of publication. But there are some things called unpublished professional reports. Typically, in an academic life, they take the form of what are called technical reports. So, for example, you could be associated with our research center here on community that Carl James runs. And if you worked on a research grant, and I don't know if Carl has what's called an occasional paper series, but sometimes centers will publish papers, but the only place you can get them is from that center. So it's like paper number 1, paper number 3, whatever. So if you look at this example here, I'm an academic, was the 4th author on a paper called Migratory Practices in Online Literacy Engagements, Technical Report 10-3. And you'll see that this was published in 2010, and the 10 probably means year, and the 3 probably means the 3rd report for that year, right? And if somebody goes to the Literacy Research Center, which is a fictitious center, then they can get a copy of this report. So even though it doesn't have an ISBN and it's not formally published, it is something that's a technical paper, and you need acknowledgement of the fact that you've written that, and it shows a certain level of scholarship. So you also notice that they have their own heading, unpublished professional reports. So it's separated from published materials, okay? Now, conference papers, this is something that everybody gets mixed up on. There's two kinds of conference papers. There's a conference paper that gets published in conference proceedings. That means you've gone to the conference, you've presented your paper, and somebody who's organizing that conference wants to take the full paper and put it into a book, or these days it could well be an internet site, under what's called conference proceedings. That counts as a publication, and that should be up under published works. But if, for example, you applied to AERA or CSSE, you sent in your abstract, you went to the conference, you gave your talk, you came home, you didn't do anything else with it, this is where it would go. It would go under conference papers. So here you can see in November 2010, I'm an academic, did a paper called Economic Functionalism as a Driving Force in School. They gave that paper at the Canadian Society for Studies in Education annual conference in Montreal, Quebec. Now you'll notice here that I'm an academic did this work alone. If I'm an academic had co-authored, they put in front of economic functionalism with Becky Smith or whoever it was they co-authored that paper with, okay? So the big thing about a CV is you want to be transparent. You don't want to be accused of taking credit where credit is not due. You want to be forthright in showing what you do. If you collaborate, you have to put your collaborators down. You don't want to hide things, you don't want to pad. Yeah.
In the case of a paper within a panel and or discussion?
You can discuss, you know, if you're on a panel, then let's suppose the panel is on economic functionalism as a driving force in school, then after the end of it, you put panel member in brackets.
Would that be the title of my paper or the panel's title?
Okay, if you've got a little 20-minute paper and it's housed under another umbrella, you put here your paper title. Don't put the panel. When I talk about putting panel member, it means we're all talking about the same thing. I've served on lots of panels, and let's suppose, I know one panel I served on, you know, I didn't have to do any preparation for it. I was the co-editor of a journal. And so the panel was on writing for academic journals. There were 4 panel members, a couple of former editors of the journal, or a couple of journals, and I don't know, a beginning academic or something like that. And we all spoke for 5 to 10 minutes on the same topic, and then we entertained questions. That's a panel.
Okay.
When you go to CSSE, and a faculty member or a fellow student has organized something under the heading of economic functionalism as a driving force in schools, and you are doing a paper on, you know, bricks and mortar, then what appears here is not economic functionalism. What appears here is bricks and mortar.
Okay.
Because that's your paper. It's unique to you. If somebody said, can I get a copy of bricks and mortar? You could just pull that up on your computer and send it to them as a PDF. Do not send it to them as a Word document. Just for your future information. Because you don't want your document to be manipulated.
Right.
Right? Okay. It's just a side tip. Okay. Now, do not use abbreviations for associations. Just because you know what CSSE is, and everybody else in your program knows what CSSE is. If you're applying, for example, for a position at an American university, CSSE could be the Canadian Society for Studies in Engineering, right? They don't know. So you spell it out. Any of the conferences, don't use acronyms, use the full titles. And the other thing you want to do is have a section called Research in Progress. Now, graduate students typically will list their thesis or dissertation. Now, the one thing I'm going to say to you is don't fake this. Don't put down 4 things saying research and process and you're not doing the research. In the employment application phase, I might look at your file and say, gosh, that's really interesting. I'd like to see a paper, or, I'd like to see the draft of the work you're doing on this. If you can't produce somebody or talk to, or something, or talk to somebody about what it is, then, you're basically showing yourself to be a fraud, So you want to have it on hand. You want real research in progress. And another section of this CV here is called professional service. Now, there is an overlap between this section of your CV and a later section called service. Here you want to focus on professional service, but I'm going to say this to you. If you don't have items under service in general, under community service, you may want to hedge your bets and place some items here and some items there, okay? So the headings, you can have a lot more headings. As a beginner, you'll usually have something like offices in professional associations, conference organizing, maybe you'll have review boards, and then you'll have that little phrase that says, see also under community service. Now, offices in professional organizations, what's meant by that? That's if you're an officer. It's not that you're a member, you're an officer, so you're on a special committee of an organization. So if you're a member of the Language and Literacy Executive Committee of CSSE, you'd put that down. If you're an executive member in any professional association that's, wide in scope. Your work on student committees here in the faculty comes later under service, okay? Conference organizing. Yes, you can put down that you were a reviewer for proposals here if you reviewed proposals at the graduate student conference. You can put down whatever activity you did in conference organizing. If you chaired sessions, if you were on the planning committee, that's all conference organizing. Being on a review board means that you're either a member of the editorial board or you serve as a reviewer. Sometimes these are the same thing, sometimes they're different. And that's why you put exactly what you did, reviewer for, and you named the journal. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of future headings like editorships, offices in association, oh, I've got that down. Memberships in public advisory committees. You might be on the Status of Women Committee or the, something that the government has dreamt up. Okay. So, if you don't have any of this kind of service, don't put in a section and have an empty space. Just don't put the heading down, okay? Teaching. This is a new section of your CV. Now, if you don't have enough teaching or service to fill most of a page, put them together. Even though I told you at the beginning, put each on its own page. Here I'm telling you the opposite. And the reason is you don't want to have like 2 inches and then go to a new page. So under teaching, you put courses taught. Now look how it's organized. Undergraduate, right? How many sections? 1 section. You put the course number. You put the course title. Now, you'll notice the institution is not down. Why is the institution not written there? Because remember where the institution is? It's back under your employment history, okay? Here you're trying to focus on not where you did the work, but what it was you did. Because people are reading this to say, what kind of teaching experience does this potential employee bring to our institution? If you've done teaching assistantships, you list them. And a lot of the time people aren't real clear about listing their teaching assistantships, and I think it's important. Once you get an academic position, you drop those assistantships off your CV. But to get the position, you put them on, okay? I know that sounds bizarre, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, look, I've got teaching experience, and I've got a couple of kinds, and it's at the post-secondary level. Because when somebody is looking to hire you, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for experience at the post-secondary level. So, we've talked about that. And again, look at the headings and the positioning. Basically, you type the semester, and then you tab over, and you know, a nice column for section, and then you tab over and you put the course number and title. It's very clear what you've done, everything matches up, and a reader can see quickly what your profile is. Now, you don't put a lifetime summary here. However, once you get further on in your academic career, you actually do put a lifetime summary for teaching. How many undergraduate courses taught, how many graduate courses taught, all these headings get counted, and you put at the beginning lifetime summary. Under service, the one thing I forgot to say under teaching is that you will, in the future, need to take account of all the graduate supervisions you do. So that, for example, if you supervise theses or dissertations, that needs to be accounted for. And I think if memory serves me correctly, because I skipped on here a bit, but there. What you would do after this is you'd have a section called graduate students supervised, and then you'd have each level, master's, you know, doctoral, and so on. And I do have at a later slide an indication of what those are. I thought it was on this slide, but it's not. So let me skip ahead to service. So with the service, again, note the level of headings. Now, this is something that you might not have thought about, but most of the time what you're going to represent here is committees you were elected to, and I know sometimes in the Graduate Student Association you just volunteer. You know, if nobody steps forward, you volunteer. But here you go. You're a graduate representative at faculty council, or you're a graduate representative on particular committees. And you'll notice this is a place where you just list the dates at the end. Okay? Unlike the other aspects of the CV where the dates are listed. And the reason this happens is once you get teaching, you will be on committees lots. And you're not going to have a big string of dates. You know, it'll make your CV just far too large if you put a big string of dates on the left-hand side. Instead, you just put the years at the end of the line, 2007 to 2008, 2008, 2009, or, you know, 2007 to 2012. So you're trying to keep this section tidy. But you'll notice that they're separated by areas within the university. So there's service on faculty of education committees, on graduate program and education committees, on graduate student organizations, on Senate of the university, university-wide committees. All of these things need to be down, and then you need to say what you did. If you were executive officer, if you were president of the Graduate Student Association, you put president, Graduate Student Association. When I was a graduate student, I was president of one of the associations in education in my faculty. So you put that down. Community service. This is the section where I told you there's some overlap. Under here, you might put something like in-service workshops, or things where you go out to the field and give talks or seminars or help the community in general. So here, for example, there's the People for Education conference. You might give a talk to that. It's not a refereed forum. You're going out, you've been asked, or you know someone and you've managed to get a spot to talk about a topic. The school district has asked you to come talk, or the Reading for the Love of the Conference, whatever the venue is. These aren't refereed, they're more workshop. You're helping people in the community. You may be paid for them, but you still put them down under community service. And here's the little bullet I told you about teaching. under teaching, future headings would be graduate thesis and dissertation supervision, and courses taught, graduate courses taught in particular, would be something that would get added later on. There is some overlap in the service section, as I said. Now, one of the things that some people put on their CVs is they put references. I personally don't think your references belong on your CV. That belongs in your letter of application. Your CV represents you and your work. Your references are people who can comment on you and your work. Or what I would do is I'd make a new heading and just have references and have the three people, usually it's 3 people, at the end. But I wouldn't put it immediately after community service or service. I would have a new page. Now, when you are putting references forward, number 1, always, always ask before you put someone's name down. I cannot state how important that is. And number 2, because you've asked, you're not just going to ask them, can you use their name of reference for a reference, but you're going to ask them to provide you with an email address, or most typically these days it is an email address, but certainly with contact information that the person can easily be contacted at. I cannot tell you how many file hiring, I'm on a hiring committee, and we're trying to contact someone and we can't contact the reference. And we've sent email after email, and then we have to go to another reference. Sometimes we have to go back to the applicant and say, we can't contact your references, can you provide us with other names? And so when you say, can I use your name and address? Then you say, look, I'm applying for a position in so-and-so. I know how the process works. It's probably going to take about a 6-month window. So, I just need to know, are you going to be contactable by email during that period? Right? You can save everybody a lot of grief by doing that legwork. And the other thing is, if you are a doctoral student or a newly minted doctoral student or a master's student for that matter, if I'm on a hiring committee, I am expecting to see your supervisor's name. And if your supervisor's name is not there, that sends up all kinds of red flags. So, if there was a problem, if you and your supervisor had a big dispute over intellectual property and you won, your supervisor's not going to be happy with you. They may not write you a lovely letter. They may, but they may not. You need to have an explanation for that decision in your cover letter. Don't go into great detail because you don't want to get into legal cases, but you need to address it. You need to address why the supervisor, sometimes the supervisor's ill, sometimes the supervisor is somewhere where they don't want to be contacted or chooses not to be contacted for some reason, and in which case you go to the next most involved person on your thesis or dissertation committee. But you do want to address that. Yes?
Should we list the relationship with this person?
One of the things you would do, if you're putting your references, you can put in parentheses thesis supervisor, dissertation supervisor, because it is inevitably the case that one of the questions I ask when I look at a list of referees is, what's the relationship? And sometimes you can tell because of other material in the file, but one always wonders what the relationship is, and it is inevitable if the dissertation or thesis supervisor is not there, the committee will go looking for them to find out what's going on. Because if you're not completed, if you're incomplete, and you're applying for a position, we want to know what stage of the dissertation you're at. And you might have given us an idea, and you might have even given us sample chapters, but we will check with the dissertation or thesis supervisor to confirm that.
Was there place earlier where we should have indicated our supervisor? Because.
No.
Okay.
Sometimes what you can do, if you look at the very first page, dissertation, and it has the topic, you could put in parentheses there the supervisor, supervisor colon, and, put the name of your supervisor. That's another way to handle it. But you do need to indicate. Now, having said all that, oftentimes the letter addresses this, the letter of application. Because you are going to have a letter of application. And that letter of application is going to sell yourself to the position that you're applying for. And within that, you have to contextualize your CV. Don't rehearse your CV, but go beyond your CV to talk about the specificities of the topics you're interested in studying and researching, and how they relate to the particular job position that's being described. A couple of don'ts of CV presentation: don't forget to spell check. I cannot tell you how many times I've opened up files and somebody's been in ahead of me, and you know what they've done? They've circled every mistake. And I think, on the one hand, how boring, and on the other hand, how easy it is to not have that happen. So, don't include irrelevant items. They'll become irritants, right? Somebody is reading a file and they'll say, why have they got this stuff in here? I'm not, this is not relevant to this job. So, another thing, if a published article gets reprinted as a chapter, you can list it in 2 places on your CV, but in the second place, you put same as, Smith 1982 or whatever. So one of the things you do not want to be accused of is padding your CV, making it look like you have more than what you have. So you have to be very transparent in this. This sounds like a silly thing to say, but don't use fancy paper. People get, you've got 50 files, and you take out this one file, and they've used heavy, weighty paper that has a nice pattern on it or something, and everybody kind of chuckles. People are amused. It doesn't, and you have to pay a lot of money for it, but it doesn't get you anything. A nice, simple CV presented on standard paper is just fine. And that cover letter is really important. The cover letter is a small essay. And that's how it's not, dear so-and-so, I'm interested in applying for the position of X. Please find attached my CV. Not going to get you anywhere in today's world. In today's world, the cover letter is a small essay that articulates you, your interest, your experience, your research in relation to that position. And the big thing is your CV is just the beginning of your application. That letter is phase 2. The references, phase 3. Any material that comes on your teaching is phase 4. And then if you finally are lucky enough to get an interview and a colloquium, all of that kind of thing, that's phase 5. So, relax. Once your CV is done and sent somewhere, it is literally out of your hands. And so that's how you have to kind of think about the CV. It is part of a large process, and once it's gone, it's gone. So you want to make it as good as you can.